Okay, we're going to honor everybody who is able to get here at noon and get started. Welcome. My name is Glenn McCrae. I'm the director of the Northeast Transportation Workforce Center and part of the National Network for Transportation Workforce, four centers covering the U.S. on looking at critical issues in workforce development for the transportation industry. And this is one of our occasional webinars, also in concert with the National Transportation Directors, to bring kind of new, innovative, and fun information and techniques out to our wider community. So I want to note that this is being recorded and will be available for viewing afterwards. We'll be sending out a link to all of the participants for that. And I'm really excited about today's presentation. I started talking with John Hansen last summer, actually, about the work that was going on at his organization and was very intrigued by the way in which they were developing a sense of common trust and common ability to work together through a pretty unusual technique. And those conversations continued, and with his rest of his team, Christina and Nick, who are here today. And there's obviously a much bigger team now with the Delaware River Port Authority, where all of this is taking place. So we're really excited to have John, Christina, and Nick with us today to talk about this idea of their approach to transforming organizational culture and how they've used the principle of applied improv to do that. And so with that, I'll turn it over to John or Christina, I think.
Great.
John?
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Glenn. It's good to be with you this afternoon. And just to give you a sense of the organization, DRPA and PATCO is a bi-state organization created by federal compact, and we operate 4 bridges that connect South Jersey to Philadelphia. The inner bridges are suspension bridges, the Ben Franklin and Walt Whitman bridges. The outer bridges are cantilever truss structures, the Commodore Barry and Betsy Ross. We also have a 15-mile heavy rail commuter line. It's third rail electrified that connects South Jersey to Philadelphia. To give you a sense of size of the organization, prior to COVID, our revenues were almost $350 million. We have a 5-year capital program of almost $850 million and about 865 employees, depending on the day. The nature of our organizational structure makes authority very diffuse. Hierarchical authority is not reliable. It's difficult to use. And so we spend a lot of time building consensus. And if you're going to be successful here, you've got to build consensus and you have to be good at it. So when I took over in the beginning of 2014 as CEO, the organization did not have a great reputation among the community. And in fact, some employees shared with me that they were embarrassed to tell their neighbors where they worked. We were at that level. We wanted to transform the organization, and we searched for the ideas that would transform it, a way to communicate those ideas, and then a way to practice and rehearse to live those ideas so that they came naturally to us. And so the ideas that we used came from an MBA program that I was in at the time at St. Joseph's University, and we chose servant leadership, and particularly the idea of stewardship, which meant that we recognized that we didn't own the bridges or the train line. We held them in trust for their owners, who are the community. Closely related to that was humility and the value of humility, because we'd been seen as self-important, insulated. We're not affected by the laws of the state of New Jersey or the state of Pennsylvania. And so people sometimes thought of us as arrogant, and we wanted to drive home these ideas of humility. The communication method we used was the strategic plan to communicate these values, and we realized that improvisational tools would allow us to practice and rehearse these concepts. And so it's important to us that all of our employees are connected to our purpose and committed to our cause. And that's how we go about sort of practicing this stewardship cause that we have.
So hi everyone, I'm Christina Maroney, and I'm really excited to be with you here today. So before we talk about what we've done to begin to change the culture, I'd like to share some background and context for how it all started. John alluded to some of the things that we've done, but several years before John became the CEO and I was in a different role in the organization, we recognized several critical issues that were hindering the operation of the organization. Referring to the slide that John just discussed, he talked about our new stewardship mission and vision and connecting others to our purpose. So the pivotal point when we began to understand the problems we faced was when we started to view things through the lens of stewardship and service and public value, sort of our purpose, the reasons that we exist as an organization, which is, again, it's to serve others through the management and operation of our transportation assets. So again, our organization has been around for almost 100 years, and we've continued to serve the public very well and consistently and reliably. But we did notice some things that were troubling within the organization. So at the time, we had several high priority mission critical projects that were going on simultaneously. And like all public agencies, whether it's transportation or just any other governmental or quasi-governmental agency, resources are constrained and capacity, staff capacity is limited. So to be successful in accomplishing and executing these projects, coordination and collaboration was of paramount importance. So we knew our employees are extremely competent and dedicated as individuals, but many departments were siloed and did not communicate with other departments, let alone collaborate. This wasn't intentional. This wasn't in any way, intended to be harmful, but it was preventing us from performing as efficiently and effectively as we should. So in addition, at the time, again, John alluded to this a little bit, many of our employees were very dissatisfied and frustrated by salary levels, opportunities or lack thereof, perceived lack thereof for advancement and promotion, low levels of trust throughout the organization, which we all felt at the time, and simply not feeling valued. So the question was, how do we begin to build trust and approaches and collaboration in our organization? Again, at the time, on a very small scale, John was not yet the CEO, we began to experiment with innovative approaches and creative solutions to foster collaboration across the Delaware River Port Authority and PATCO. We facilitated a new strategic planning process, which was actually the first of 2 new processes over the last 12 years. We began promoting authentic communication and 2-way communication feedback loops between management and employees. So we're not just asking you what you want, we're also responding and giving you reasons why we can or couldn't follow through on some of your input. We built connections, as John mentioned, around our stewardship role and purpose. We started branding and again, not marketing superficially, but really hitting home our role as stewards of public transportation assets. We launched a process improvement program, which we called Lean Government, based on the principles of Lean and Six Sigma. Again, that represented the collaboration of teams across DRPA and PATCO. And at the time, we had approximately 100, or initially 100 people from all areas and levels of the organization. We focused on accountability, personal responsibility, and legacy to accomplish the work of the authority. So we made some progress.
So, and then when we were undertaking those sort of pre-programs, I was in a different role as well. I was the chief financial officer at that time. Now, this slide really represents a diagram of our approach to connecting people to our purpose and enlisting them in our cause. Our strategy for serving the community, both internally in the organization and externally, our stakeholders.
So again, by the time John became the CEO in 2014, and I was actually still in my previous role, we felt we were on the path to change, but we knew we still had a lot to do in order to move the organization or turn the ship in a much more radical or positive direction towards transformation. But again, the question, how? So we had learned over the years that people are primarily motivated by opportunities for autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So, again, in the public sector, it would be very difficult. It's not a lack of trust in our people, but we have to balance trusting our employees, i.e. autonomy, with the demands of the public who we serve in terms of accountability and transparency. So instead, we really focused our time and resources to foster mastery by promoting employee training, growth, and development, and on purpose by, once again, consistently emphasizing the concepts of public service and servant leadership. We were very clear at every step about our commitment to creating an environment that encourages, honors, and rewards collaboration, meaningful communication, and the open exchange of ideas. Again, the two-way feedback loops that we've tried to create at all levels between management and supervisory personnel and their direct reports. Finally, we were very committed to creating an organization that values results and emphasizes accountability. So one of John's first actions was to meet with all employees across the organization. We scheduled meetings. It wasn't one-on-one because, again, we have 865 employees, but we scheduled small group meetings. That was the first time. Subsequently, he's done, additional meetings without managers and supervisors present. But after the first round of meetings, John communicated his vision, his expectations, and what he was hoping to accomplish in bringing everyone together behind our stewardship mission. We then conducted an employee survey to help us more fully understand sort of the more granular issues that existed, again, at all levels of the organization. Not surprisingly, the results were extremely consistent with some of the problems I previously described. Our employees were simply dissatisfied and weren't happy with the situation, our organizational status at that time. So we really focused on building a more collaborative leadership team, and that's when we created the CEO Leadership Program to bring our senior managers together to practice leadership, team building, and other soft skills using applied improv concepts and exercises. So for the record, today we view those soft skills, which Nick is going to touch on in the next slide, they're now viewed as essential skills in our organization. And I mean, they're consistent with our shared values and disseminated at all levels to all employees and externally to other external stakeholders. So the bottom line is, at that time, in the early days of our program, we really began encouraging employees, and at this point it was mostly managers and supervisors, to take reasonable and responsible risks and to cultivate a judgment-free environment where anybody's ideas would be considered and supported.
So in addition to the big idea that we had about stewardship, holding the assets in trust for the public, were these other ideas from servant leadership, that a leader's main goal and responsibility is to serve others. First, their people, then customers and other stakeholders, and that the servant leader focuses on people that are directly below them. And really, this means turning the org chart upside down. And when you do that, the higher that you are in the traditional org chart means the lower that you are in this new inverted org chart, the more people that you have to serve. But this, we believed, and it is bearing out, leads to high levels of commitment to the cause, as well as performance, and enables us to practice stewardship and practice humility and service. And along the way, thanks to a couple of books that we were reading, we realized that these are the basic tenets of improvisational theater.
So that's where I came in. I'm Nick Gillette. I'm a performing artist and a teaching artist in Philadelphia. I primarily work with improv. And if you're not familiar with improv as a whole, improv is a performance. It's frequently comedy. It can be music or dance. I work mostly with theater, where myself and my team will go out on stage with no plan. We have no script. We don't know what the show is going to be about. And yet, if someone makes a choice, we all have practiced supporting that, building on it, and one move at a time, collaboratively across an entire team, will make an entire night of comedy. It's frequently, I mean, it's always surprising. It's frequently very funny. And it's a blast to do. And what I teach is not just to theater students, but I teach to businesses and universities applied improvisation. And this is what John alluded to. This is a not too new, a pretty well-established approach to organizational health, where it turns out the skills needed to improvise well on stage are the exact same skills that are necessary for good stewardship and servant leadership. So these look differently if they're on stage or if they're being applied in an organization or a team setting, but the skills and drills are in many ways identical. It's a way of actually practicing, not just talking about the values, but doing them. The main goal of an improviser is always support. Someone goes out on a limb, it's then my job to make them look good. On stage, that looks like one thing. In an organization, you can imagine someone has an idea, you want to go and support that in any way that you can. And we can't actually support our team members without first listening to them and caring about what is animating them, what is bringing them to these new ideas. Those do sound like, as Christina said, very soft skills. Like caring sounds like just an emotional thing, but empathy is understanding. And organization is served by increasing the number of people who are understanding each other within it. Why something is happening might be a question that can be easily answered just by taking that first step and thinking, okay, this person might not, I don't know quite what they mean yet, but I'm willing to find out. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, that small amount of trust. And that those little risks of trust or risks of proposing a new idea, of speaking up to something that needs to be addressed, it's absolutely critical for an organization that wants to grow and change. Improv also, and this is never the goal, but it just happens to be a blast. It's fun. It's intrinsically rewarding. And that sort of has two effects. One is that it keeps people engaged in a learning environment. We're not just sitting down and digesting things from books. We're up on our feet in a room full of our coworkers doing these things together. But it's also a great learning environment. When people are relaxed, when we're laughing with one another, when we're having a good time, that's actually when people are the most receptive to some of these ideas, which at their core are asking for a pretty big shift, a mindset that goes from it can't be done to first asking, what would it take? What can be done right now?
So we find that improv offers us the opportunity to practice and rehearse our mission, our vision, our values, servant leadership skills, and it lets us play in a non-threatening way with the trappings of status.
Yeah, status is one of a number of different lessons that we would focus on for the times that we would have together. You can see this is a list of just different topics that we would take time to focus on. And they are not just things that an improviser does and the improv toolkit of practice points to. These are the servant leadership skills. Status has very much to do with self-awareness, how you affect another person. Are you making room for discussion, or are you dominating a conversation, right? We have to be not just aware of interpersonal skills, but intrapersonal, right? What is the effect that I am having? How can I be aware of that myself? And that's just one example. You can see this list. Persuasion and negotiation. We talk about how best to approach disagreements, right? Difficult topics, or speaking to some like difficult people. All of these things are worth spending the time to look at the best research of, and then to experience, to do the exercises which allow us to experience and learn experientially.
Yeah, and I would just like to also offer, as a participant in these sessions, and definitely out of my comfort zone more often than not, the way that these are delivered, the way that we present them, which, you know, Nick and John will describe in a little bit more detail, truly energized those of us who are participating. Again, it was all about being vulnerable and taking risks, which again isn't necessarily part of, you know, my job description in a sense, but it really made me feel, and I think others, empowered to learn personally, but also I felt empowered to be able to share the information with those that I work with, you know, either for me or just that I work with, because it really has made a difference in my relationships with a lot of our other members of leadership, and also all of my colleagues across the organization.
Because these games that we play involve letting your guard down, and they're sort of like team building exercises, but on steroids, right? And when you let your guard down in this way, people become closer and the group becomes more cohesive.
So I would try to take that whole list. It's a huge list of different topics that applied improv practices and touches upon. And I tried to condense it down. If you leave this seminar and you understand just 3 things about, okay, what is improv? What does it actually teach? I hope this is a good takeaway for you. One of the main things is about listening. Listening deeply without expectation, which really means kind of addressing that the way we typically listen to anyone has to do with listening to respond, right? I'm just waiting for my turn, really. Listening with an attempt at understanding, it's simple but not easy. It's something that actually requires practice. And also, to not expect or prejudge what is coming at us means we might be surprised. If we only ever think we're going to hear what we already think we know, then we're not actually going to hear the new pieces of information, or even how something is being said, which can have a huge amount of necessary critical info. Curiosity over judgment has a pretty broad approach to not just creative risk-taking, but any disagreement, right? Instead of shutting down if I disagree with something and say that must be wrong, I want to first get curious. I want to ask myself, or even ask the person I'm disagreeing with, what has led them to think that, right? To get curious about the differences allows us to actually explore, oh, okay, we actually have a huge amount of common ground. And either I'm missing something critical that they know, or I've identified what they might not have seen. And again, just that number of perspectives all working together lead us to a better place ultimately. And the trust that takes, because it does take a lot of trust to work with other people in this way of allowing someone to explain themselves. It allows the risks of collaborative decision-making, of letting someone who you trust make decisions. It sounds, I mean, hopefully not radical, but it is, again, simple, still not easy. It's difficult to do. But if you purposefully build a culture that not just tolerates risks, but celebrates it, you're going to only be able to do that if you already have a strong foundation of trust. And like John was saying just a moment ago, what we're really doing is building the bonds between people where that trust is possible. These are some of the things we've started to hear around the office. They all have to do with improv, just little ways that the lessons kind of become words. Yes, and if you've heard anything about improv, you've probably heard of this as like the maxim. Yes, and just means not literally saying yes. We're not all just like agreeing and going with everything. It means, yes, I hear you, right? I agree that I'm listening. And I also have my contribution. It's just a shorthand way of looking at that. Bring a brick, not a cathedral, and do the next little thing are related. I don't have to come with the full idea pre-planned and already complete. In fact, if that's the case, then I'm excluding a lot of other perspectives I might miss. But if I bring a brick and then you bring a brick and suddenly we're building something together, then it's going to be a tailor-built solution. It's going to be responsive as all of us are looking at it. Do the next little thing. Same about just an iterative approach. Do what you can with what you have on hand. If you have an organization that approaches change, not with it can't be done, but rather what would it take? Sometimes what it takes can only be small at first. But if everyone's on board with that, it can grow and grow with momentum.
And Nick, this is one, do the next little thing is one, I love them all, but one that I've leaned on a lot, right? I realize I don't have to solve the whole problem right now. I don't even have to solve the whole problem. All I have to do is the next little thing, the next right thing, and trust that somebody else will take it from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Supporting your partner, and I've got your back. These are just ways, of course, of, if I can use a real world example, I overheard a conversation between Christina and John. They were about to head into, I don't know if it was a board meeting or who it was with, but John asked Christina directly, what is it you're trying to advance? How can I help? What do you need me to back you up on? And to me, I was just like, it was a little like proud improv teacher moment of like, I think they're getting it. I think it's working. But it's really, you can imagine an entire team moving with that dynamic. Really has something special if everyone can see the value of supporting one another. This last one, mistakes are gifts, is a little counterintuitive, right? We're all like type A, like we want to get it straight. We want to get it right all the time. But sometimes that's the paralysis of not being able to even begin. Competent mistakes. If you have pilot programs that fail and you understand why, that's not a waste, that's a lesson, and that is incredibly valuable. And if the opposite is no risks are taken and no mistakes are made, that's stagnation for any organization.
So John, just speaking of do the next little thing, all these programs were actually born from that inaction. And I think, John, that was your approach to the CEO Leadership Series.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had gotten to a point initially when I took over, we had made some changes. The pace of change was slowing down. Some of the people who were closest to me in the organization, including Christina, were pressing me for more. And then I had this meeting one day with Christina. It was an impromptu meeting, and she just pressed me like, what do you want to do? And I blurted out, I want to have a leadership club. I want to have a club devoted to leadership among the organization. And so from that, the CEO Leadership Series was started in a format that's pretty close to what we still use. It begins with a didactic portion where we present something from a business book, from a textbook, from an article, from a podcast, traditional sort of training. And then from there, we go into these improv exercises, these team building on steroid exercises. And this was an iterative process too, right? Doing the next little thing, getting people more and more able to tolerate these exercises. And the story I want to tell you about, one day there was a particular exercise that I wanted to get to, that I wanted to do, and it's called Bunny Bunny. And I was pressing Nick and Christina, like, I don't think we're ready for it. I don't think we're ready for it. But if you can imagine this, because this is me and the C-level suite, right? The top people, and you're in a corner, in a circle, in a room, and the goal of it is to share the spotlight, right? Passing the spotlight around, but while everybody's involved. And so it starts like this. Somebody starts out, the whole group starts out with sort of like a rhythmic chant. It's like, ba, ba. And they're clapping, keeping time, clapping their thighs. And then one person is moved by the spirit of the bunny and goes, bunny, 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 and selects the next person. And whoever is becoming the bunny, the people on either side of them are going tiki-taki, like this. And it's really embarrassing, right? But you're practicing sharing the spotlight. You're also letting your guard down in a way that after you've been through that and been through it a few times, it's going to transform relationships. And it was extremely successful when we did that, right? People really took to it. After the CEO Leadership Series, Christina and her team, working with Nick, created the peer-to-peer leadership exchange, Next Level Managers. Through the pandemic, when we couldn't be together to do this, we actually, Nick actually created a recorded webinar series with employees working together on a platform like Zoom. And coming in 2022, we're looking to expand the live improv training to make it available to all employees.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add that throughout the pandemic, we continue to, again, to host the CEO leadership sessions and the peer-to-peer leadership exchange virtually via Zoom or Teams, depending on the session. So, again, we're really looking forward to continuing or doing it in person, hopefully very shortly. But in the meantime, we've continued to host them virtually.
So we continue, like this transformation is ongoing. We're not done, but we believe we're on the path. And we've used these tools, particularly the improv tools, to lubricate the gears of our professional relationships. It really paid off in our response to the pandemic. I mean, people were working together one day and out the next. We had to keep the doors open, the bridges open, the trains running, and the relationships that we build up, we were able to sort it all out. We were able to get the job done with very little illness and really next to no community-acquired illness in the workplace. We've been far more collaborative. The cohesion that we built through these exercises has really torn down the silos, and people were even compartmentalized within the silos, gone a long way to building a more collaborative and functional team, and become aware of status, which is a huge thing, right? When you walk around, all of us have some level of status. We don't realize it. We don't realize the impact that we have on other people. But when you start to play with status through some of these games, you really become aware of it, and it enables you to choose whether you need to be in a high status position to just give an order. Sometimes that's necessary. Most of the time, you need to take a lower status posture to foster collaboration and conversation.
So this, to sum up, this is a quote from the end of Hamlet: "The readiness is all." Applied improvisation, what it's done for DRPA PATCO is an enormous topic, but to really sum it up, I think this is as best as we could possibly do. We can't be prepared for everything, but we can practice being at the edge of unknowing, to know what we do know, to be able to work together to address any unknown situation. As John said, the pandemic was a large unknown for everyone entering into it, and I think one of the best of organizations that managed to overcome those difficulties and hurdles were on the strength of how it was able to move together as a unit.
Okay, folks, this concludes our presentation, and now we'd be happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you very much for your time.
Great. Thanks, all three of you. This has been terrific. We do have some good questions coming in through the chat, and I'll pass them on. This has been a lot of fun, and people feel free to continue to just type into the chat any thoughts or questions you want to share with the group. If we don't get to everything before 1, we'll definitely follow up with that. The first, and I think, Christina, you already spoke some to this, is did you have any difficulty getting buy-in from employees who felt like they were really out of their element with improv, which I think could be a fairly universal thing?
I'll start, because absolutely. I mean, when John first proposed that we do something like this, I was very supportive, and I was, really behind him, but very like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do it. So, I'm speaking for myself. I wish I were more comfortable, and I've gotten comfortable over the years, but it was definitely, we very gingerly approached the improv. We didn't just force people. First of all, these sessions are all voluntary. We strongly encourage participation, but I think we probably had 23 to 25 people in the senior management program initially, maybe even less. And now we've got upwards of 40, 42. And again, everyone can't come to every session, and the virtual sessions are a bit of a stretch, or are more challenging. But again, we built trust. We understood no one was going to heckle one another or make fun of, or talk behind your back. It just became increasingly normalized. And some of, again, the terminology that Nick focused on, it's not a stretch. These are things that if we're not, walking around the hallway saying, bring a brick, not a cathedral, we're at least realizing that individual contributions are all welcome, but they don't have to be perfected. So I think, again, we still have some work to do, but we're, mindful to change it up. And we also, do surveys, not frequently, but we do surveys to see what others are looking for. Again, people push back against the improv, but it's really important. And I think, we've sort of overcome the initial hurdles.
And one more thing that I would say in this, originally when we were trying to get an improviser on board, and Nick's actually the second one that we got, I started out doing it because we wanted to get started in the spirit of do the next little thing, right? The first outside improviser we brought in, he's a great Philadelphia improviser. His name's Matt Holmes, and he does a show called Matt End. And literally what he does is he pulls somebody out of the audience who has no improv experience, and he does a whole show with them. And he does a brilliant show. And the point that we made with it is the guy that he pulled out of our group when he did a fantastic job, had no experience. People were stunned because of this guy's particular posture in the organization. And the idea being that if he could make that individual look good just by supporting him when he knew nothing about what he was doing, imagine how good your people will look. They know what you're doing if you support them that way. And that kind of broke the ice. And we took it very easy in the beginning. People went to status. They always went to high status to protect themselves. But over time, people dropped their guard and dropped the status.
Yeah. I think the question about buy-in is a great one. On day one, working with the group, when this was January 2020, we were all in person, and I gave them permission to say no, and it's like, this is the opposite. I thought improv was about yes, but they first needed to feel safe, to not be, there's nothing less fun than mandatory fun, right? But really to be able to say, like, this is a risk that you can take if you want to join us. It might feel scary, but that's what we're practicing. We're practicing trying new things. And I encouraged their feedback afterwards. And even on that first day, I remember there was one person who said, like, I love the didactic portion. I love, like, learning. I hate the improv exercises. And I just gave that person permission to hate it, right? To meet it where they were. And over time, I have to say, it's never been like public, but whenever I've had a conversation with that person, like, it has deepened our understanding. And it was just the respect of saying, like, I hear you, and I'm not going to force you to do any of this, right? You can only meet this when you're ready to, and the risk to jump in will always be there. And I think over time that does have an effect. But a culture of trust needs to address the fear of what that means first.
I think related to that is this next question, which is, kind of what gave you the confidence that this is going to be effective? Did you have some evidence of this, or did you think it would work great and if implemented, or was it literally a shot in the dark to say, let's try this, see if it works. If it doesn't, we'll move on?
So as Christina said, we had built up a track record back when I was the CFO. We implemented this lean government thing. And one of the clues that we got was, where I went out, I became a Lean Six Sigma black belt, and then I taught the skills, and then we actually put people to work on processes. After we sunsetted that, because we couldn't get the full commitment of the organization to buy into it, people kept saying to us, what I really miss about that is I used to get to meet people from all across the organization who I never met before, who I never got to talk to, who can help me do my job, who are giving me ideas. So we knew that we wanted to do something that was going to bring people together, right? But we were in a different time in the organization. We also, we were reading books. Somebody asked about books in the chat. There was a book by a guy named Dan Pink, and he had a whole chapter on improv, pointed to another book called Group Genius by a guy named Keith Sawyer, which was just about this subject. And we just thought, we're just going to try. We were improvising before we even realized it, right? We're going to try this. And it wasn't always easy. Like now you look back and it looks like it was on this straight line. I can remember having meetings with Christina and Rob Alessiani, sometimes who was the guy before Nick, who we had, and say, are the wheels coming off this? Is it falling apart? What do we got to change? So we didn't know, but we knew the state of the organization needed to change. We knew we needed to try something, and we just were like, if this doesn't work, we're gonna have to change course.
Yeah, there's a large body of research from the Harvard Business Journal, different leadership science journals that look at improv. They all conclude generally the same thing, that this might be something. And further research is needed. And I think I do like that idea of it might, and I think it's the difficulty of a lot of social sciences is there's no way to repeat or replicate an exact experiment. A lot of these, what we're working on, the interpersonal skills, are by definition subjective. It would be neat to see how improv, like I'm thinking of even what would the control for the experiment be, right? Does improv work any better than another team building activity? Or simply, is it the time people spend together that's a little bit outside of their normal workflow? I think there's definitely room for research. This seems to be effective, but the only real evidence that we have from inside of it is this handful of studies that are saying this is worth still looking at, and the anecdotes of listening to the organizations that I've worked with in the past.
And I think it's really just about a commitment to making a change, right? There's probably a lot of different ways you can do it, but if it's just a lot of crass techniques that you're throwing out there, that's not going to work. You got to have a commitment to change. I'm sorry, Christina, I sort of stepped on
you. No. And I was just going to say, it's really hard when you have to be able to measure things, and I know that's sort of what everyone points to. How do you know? And unfortunately, as Nick is saying, a lot of it is subjective and anecdotal. But myself, I've been here for a very long time. I've had different roles. We've had ups and downs, as John's described, and this is definitely a high. This for me personally has been tremendous, and I just have to look to how our organization responded to the pandemic. We pivoted on a dime. From one day to the next, and then throughout, we developed this amazing journey back to the workplace plan, recognizing that our primary responsibility is the keeping and care of our workforce and our customers. So, we're a transportation organization who operates 24/7, 365 days a year. So we had no excuse. Granted, we pulled people as needed, and some of us were remote, but we mobilized. We had a task force. We were communicating. John, we had daily calls. I had daily calls with my staff. It was just, we really didn't miss a beat. Again, we can't control what the outcomes due to the pandemic, but we can try to control, or at least really promote, ongoing collaboration and communication. And the reason I say this is, again, I've worked with so many of my colleagues for almost 30 years, and we never worked together before. And now, you know, I can count on them, they can count on me, and we know it. And you know, you reach across, and again, you know, I work for both organizations, but you know, in the past they were very different organizations, and now we view ourselves as a team, a collaborative team, and we trust each other.
And this book that I talked about, Group Genius by Keith Sawyer, he's a professor somewhere out in the Midwest who studies creativity. And his premise is that creativity is not the insight of one great mind that then disseminates it. It's a bunch of small sparks that among a bunch of different individuals that cumulatively make a big difference.
I'll get that done.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you won't be surprised, you're probably looking in the chat, that a lot of the questions have to do with implementation. So whether it's top down or bottom up, kind of how do you start to infiltrate your organization with an idea? What are the resources that are available, you know, kind of beyond this webinar where you're sparking this thought, maybe this will work back home, kind of, well, what would you advise an organization to do, or people within an organization that want to try this out?
I mean, you do the same thing, right? Do the next little thing. The first thing is get a group of committed people, right? Reach out to people who you think might know something about it. But the biggest thing, I mean, what we did literally was, I have no special training in psychology or anything like that. I'm a CPA, right? We just knew we had to make changes, and you know, a few of us got together. It was me, Christina, our chief engineer, Mike Venuto, the guy who runs our train operation, John Rink, Tony Brown is our chief administrative officer, lent support to this. And, you know, we just started talking, what will help make a change? And I think there's a lot of different ways you can do it. This one worked for us, but it also happened to be in part the accident of what we were reading at that time. This book by Dan Pink had a chapter about improv. He pointed us to other books. We started talking about how can we adapt this to our organization.
And it also helps when you start from the top. You know, again, you need to consider everyone, frontline employees, but, you know, John was definitely, first of all, as the CFO, he was still chief level. So it just made it a little bit easier to get support and buy-in, because this was John's vision, you know, as CFO and as CEO. And it made it very easy for some of us to get on board and to just probe and again, explore and experiment and say, what about this? And what about this? And, you know, I'm looking at my bookshelf. I mean, I have probably 100 books that we've touched upon, you know, perhaps not doing a deep dive, but, you know, we've done things like Simon Sinek's Start With Why. And we workshopped that a couple of years ago, and we came up with our leadership team's why statement. You know, the soul of an organization. I mean, I think one iteration of the CEO leadership program was sort of like a de facto book group, where we procured copies of certain books upon request. And then, you know, we just dove in and did a couple of sessions on each of the books and each of the topics. And people can recommend and propose topics or anything of interest that's going to help us. Again, improv is not, it's theater, but it's for application in the business and organizational environment. And I think we've done a really good job to make sure that that's first and foremost. It's the performance of all of us within the organization, not, and this, I've said this a million times, we're not doing improv just for the sake of improv. Yes, it is fun, and yes, we do play, but it's very focused toward what our expectation is in terms of the outcome.
Yeah, John, I know we talked about this issue of it's interesting that you and your CEO, so you can kind of bring this in without a lot of resistance, but you also don't have an unlimited budget for something like this just because you're CEO. So how do you deal with, the cost aspects of, or what are the cost aspects of this type of programming within an organization?
So this was really, for us, really cheap, right? Because we didn't get consultants. We just decided to do it on our own. Initially, it started even just with me doing it. We had tried to connect with a local improv theater, in fact, the one where I got my training, but they were going through their own growth issues at the time. They were expanding and couldn't get involved, and so we just started. And at the time, look, I really did a deep dive. I trained in it and I performed. I performed with a couple of teams around Philadelphia, and there was a guy who became the first coach. I mentioned his name before, Rob Alessiani. He was the coach of the team that I was on with a bunch of people who were half my age or less. And he had just left his job. He was looking to do more things in the arts. And I said, Rob, look, I can't pay you a lot of money, but I can take you on part-time and have you work on organizational development things, the improv being the biggest thing. And so Rob agreed to do it, and relatively inexpensively as a part-time employee. I made the same very persuasive pitch to Nick, right? I can't afford to pay you a lot. I can't bring you on full time, but if this is something that will work for you, unfortunately, Nick was in a place where he could do it. So for us, the expense, if you want to call it that, is the time of the employees who are devoted to this. But most of the employees just have to get their work done otherwise,
And normally we do it during lunchtime. So, right. Occasionally we provided lunch a couple of years ago, but it's bring your own lunch, or so we generally, I do have a very limited budget, but I haven't had any expenditures because we haven't had, expenses, a couple books here and there. But that's about it. It's largely the people who participate are the program.
I think this other question here, which is probably a good one to end on, and interesting about other people. Just John and Christina, what do you think is the most important or even most interesting thing you've learned about employees individually as a result of doing these exercises?
Well, I'll start, and John, you can finish it off. As I mentioned, the dynamic, certain individuals, I had no idea what they were capable of and what they were really made of. Again, we value our employees, and I know everyone is talented and competent, but just like interesting and, learning stuff about, things that you just wouldn't know about someone, it just builds my confidence in knowing, wow, what a great team we have. And I think that's what it has been. It's having each other's backs, genuinely though, not just saying it, but seeing it in practice, seeing people not pair off, but a lot of the team building exercise and the improv exercise, you have a partner initially or at some point. And it's just the willingness for people to, incrementally put themselves out there. And also they keep coming back. And one of the complaints I've gotten consistently through the pandemic is, gosh, I can't wait till we're back in the multipurpose room, because, it's a big room that we all, would congregate, which is just not a thing right now, but hopefully soon. So that for me is the people out. It's all about, really, I have such respect for my colleagues. They're just awesome.
Absolutely. I think what you learn when you start to interact with people at this level is that they're capable of much more than you usually think. Our minds are wired in a way that we take shortcuts, right? Because we're not always thinking about every aspect of every moment. And what that results in at times is we pigeonhole people or we label them and we think, well, this is my go-to person for that. This is this person's area of expertise. This person is always going to complain to me about this or that. And you start to realize that, really realize, I mean, it's one thing to know it, but it's another thing to really realize how much depth there is to every single person that you meet, and how much they all want to succeed, even your problem employees, if you can get to them at the right time, in the right way, they want to succeed. I also got to tell you this story about something that I learned about myself on this, and because of playing with status and becoming more aware of status. I'm a guy who, I started on an assembly line. I was a maintenance man. I went to college at night. And so I sort of worked my way up that way, right? So I always had this idea of myself as somebody who doesn't take themselves too seriously, is sort of a lower status person. And one day I walked into a meeting and there was a guy sitting at the head of the table. My immediate reaction was, that's my seat. Right? It was my immediate reaction, but because of all the work we've done, I had to laugh at myself and say, you horse's ass. Like, all this stuff you tell yourself, and here's your reaction, right? So it definitely changes the way that you understand other people and their capabilities for the better. And you're gonna come across some revelations about yourself as well, if you're willing to be self-aware when you undertake something like this.
Terrific. I can't thank you all enough for sharing these ideas, this concept, your experience with it. I think this was extremely beneficial for everybody participating and will generate a lot of conversation back at home organizations. I did note in the chat that John, I don't know if it was a mistake, but said, well, maybe we would do a future workshop where, we would online be able to practice some of these with people who would come in. So we'll take a poll afterwards and see if there's a critical mass of folks who would like to join us for that, as well as other future workshops that we'll be putting on. So John and Christina generously shared their emails in the chat. We'll post them again with the recording that you'll all get an email about after we wrap up this session. So thanks for everybody for participating today. Hope you have a great rest of the week. Thank you again, John, Christina, and Nick, for being with us and sharing today.
Thanks, Glenn, and we would love to come back.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Glenn, and we'd love to come back again and showcase how brilliant Nick is at that. And that would really be the next step.
Take care.
We will. We'll look at that. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
So, bye now.